Bonjour, bienvenue. Merci pour assister à ce grand débat 2018 dans le cadre de ce 46e congrès de l'Intec. L'an dernier, on parlait d'une révolution qui était la révolution digitale.
A digital revolution, you might have seen this on YouTube. And today we're talking about an entirely different revolution which has to do with nature and the environment and that has to do with energy transition. And this is one of the pillars of the Congress that was designed by Pascal Asselin, which has to do with the analysis, the cost assessment of construction. And one of the goals is to reduce as much as possible the carbon imprint of construction. Philippe Pelletier will be part of the debate. He's the chairman of the Sustainable Development Plan. He's also a lawyer. He does many things. Pascal Asselin, who's the chairman of the Intec. Benoît Bazin, who's the deputy general director of Saint-Gobain. Nicolas Bouzou, who's an economist and a writer, and who was the founder of a legal practice. You may participate as much as you want, given the stake, the importance of the subject. Don't hesitate. So we'll start with a roundtable. We all remember the Grenelle agreement that took place about 10 years ago in 2007. We also remember COP21 2 years ago. Time flies. And there is a real environmental emergency. So what do you all think about that? What do you think is happening with this environmental emergency? Philippe, let me remind everyone that you know a lot about that domain, and the Sustainable Development Plan is a sort of middleman between the ministries and local authorities. So I'll try and answer your question regarding the situational analysis today. I'd just say that since the Grenelle de l'Environnement in 2007, there's been an evolution of what you're calling the energy transition. And I think we should actually call it the environmental transition of the construction sector. And what strikes me is that actions are consistent. We had 3 different presidents since the Grenelle was voted, and I do think that the red thread of that will lead us to the prospect of 2050 is still the same. There might have been some slight changes, but there is a real consistency. However, what still hasn't happened truly is the creation of a big market that would support these ambitions. One could say that the renovation market in France is not yet to be considered a mature market, and one could also think that the goals that are being set to adjust our construction rules still haven't been reached their optimum level when it comes to their implementation. That is to say that we still have some progress to make. However, we have a path to follow, and I think it's the right one. Pascal, you wanted this Congress to have an international dimension and to be of a concern for the future generation. So what is your vision regarding the situational analysis of the environmental emergency? Well, here we have to consider the time frame we're talking about. It can be very subjective. Regarding the economists of construction, we've been working for quite some years with the European Parliament. We issued different papers regarding all this, and we also created digital tools, and we do think that these digital tools will help us use data more efficiently. 20 years ago, calculating the carbon footprint of a construction took months or even years, and today these digital tools will help us do that more quickly. Next, the director of PPC, you are present, Saint-Gobain is present in more than 70 countries, you have many employees throughout the world, so you do have a vision of what's happening in the world, and you became aware of this emergency a few years back. Yes, indeed, there's a real emergency, there's a pressure on cities. There is this emergency because of the expansion of cities, and we realize that the signatory countries of COP21, the contracting parties of COP21 still haven't made much commitment. This is something I'd like to mention at the international level. And in France, many things have been done. As Mr. Pelletier said, the renovation market still has to be improved. Also, there is a problem of workforce when it comes to the Western markets. This is also something that we have to bear in mind. You also created the Global Alliance for Construction following COP21 with different partners in different countries, and it was a concrete action, a concrete response in order to try and reduce greenhouse gases. Yes, the idea was to create exchanges between states and companies. It was something wonderful. We were present in about 40 green building councils. The idea was to do some training, to convey information, and so on. It was good. Nicolas, you also have you show that you have an economist point of view, but that also of a sociologist. How would you describe this revolution and this degree of emergency? What is your mindset now? Well, I would say that the degree of emergency is really high because commitments were made with the Paris agreements, but still the path that we're following are not good enough. We still have issues when it comes to climate change. We're going to reach the higher temperatures, and you can see that the carbon emissions were quite pessimistic, even though things are improving a bit. So we're not at ease and in a good state of mind yet, and even though I'm not a climatologist. The idea is that we really need to increase our efforts because the battle is far from being won. I would like just to say that regarding the means that are being used for climate change, well, we could say that there are three different means of actions that are being used. The decrease energy transition, and I do think that the word energy transition is not the right one. We're not going to talk about decrease, the degrowth in a way, because it's an impossibility. It shouldn't even be considered, and therefore energy transition is something on which we should have focused, or at least that's what I thought, because I thought that it was a real powerful lever. Indeed, renewable energies are very attractive, electric cars are very attractive, and well, then a book was published. I'm sure that many of you heard about it. Guillaume Pitron's book on rare metals show that actually, if you consider the entire life cycle of a wind turbine, or the question becomes more of a thorny question. And in a battery, there's also a lot of rare metals, and the problem isn't the fact that they're rare, it's the fact that extracting them is very costly, and that the Chinese are the one extracting them at about 90%. So I'm very happy to talk at this roundtable, because I do think that the big subject for the years to come is something essential, obviously, for you. It has to do with energy efficiency, and I do think that it will become more and more prevalent in the years to come, because in the end, we know that some materials will have to be more and more efficient. Well, here it will be simpler than the energy transitions in terms of, for instance, wind energy and so on. Today, we're talking about renovating housings. When you start from a stock and you want to improve them, it's going to be very complicated. And yet, I do think that it will be the big issue to address in terms of sustainable development in the years to come. You talked about a plan. A plan has just been presented by Nicolas Hulot in terms of energy renovation. It concerns 500,000 housing dwellings for people with a modest income, people who might not be able to heat their dwellings. So this is something that is very important. And since we're talking here with economists and specialists, we're going to address these dark areas, the dark areas from that plan. But do you think that there are more things that could be done? Because here you were the middleman between the government and the sector. Well, I just would like to point out one thing regarding the emergency, and I'm sure that it's going to shed light on what I'm going to say regarding the plan. We are facing a huge difficulty, namely that, well, as everybody's just said, we are in a hurry. We need to get it together and master our greenhouse gases emissions and our consumption, our energy consumption. And at the same time, we know that these virtuous evolutions will only take place when society, that is to say, each and every one of us, whether we're talking about those consuming real estate properties or those offering or service providers, will have adapted to these changes. And it will take time for society to show its agreement in terms of offer and demand, and to make sure that all of this is relevant. So we're in between two waters here. There is a real emergency, and therefore we will impose things, we will force things upon us. And truth be told, society, in order to transform itself, needs time. So there are two different time frames to take into account. Yes. And I think the plan has to do with us staying in this momentum that will lead us forward. But at the same time, we need things to change to make sure that those who are in the most precarious position can trigger some changes in their dwellings, and to make sure that the information they receive is relevant, and that a quality offer can be deployed. This plan has nothing to do with an obligation. It is not compulsory. It just sets priorities to make sure that we target what's essential. That is to say, first, a very important social priority. The fact that we have to put an end to energy insecurity. We know that 1.5 million households cannot afford heating their dwellings over 10 years. So that's 150,000 households a year. But the policy will not allow us to solve each and every one of their problems. So the National Housing Agency will be in charge of part of the problem, and the private sector will also have the possibility to address the issue. So we tell companies, artisans to work together and try and find solutions that will allow us to make sure that these households in precarious conditions can be given an offer that to get them out of this thorny issue. So 75,000 cases will go to the national agency. 75,000 cases will be dealt with by the private sector. So the 1.5 million households.
Oui, ça c'est les gens qui ont froid chez eux carrément.
Voilà.
Ce qui est intenable.
Living in precarious conditions are people that cannot afford heating their homes. So obviously, we will consume more energy because at the moment these households do not heat their dwellings. But it is very important for them to be able to do so. Secondly, what's also important is to be able to provide assistance to the local authorities to make sure that
l'école, le collège, le lycée, l'université, suivant les strates de collectivité territoriale.
Schools and every aspect of the local authorities play their part. And I really would like to focus on on education, because I do think that this change cannot happen without the education sector. When children learn the right gestures, there will be wonderful ambassadors for renovation and change, because they will educate their parents. Yes, indeed. So this plan puts the stress on this dark area, on this sort of niche that had been left aside so far. So the idea is to renovate a quarter of the public buildings in the 5 years to come. Yes, and I think that we should put the stress on all the schools and education buildings. Yes, and I do think that this plan was really well made. Like you said, we cannot renovate all the buildings, unfortunately. So we have to define an order in terms of priorities. And like you said, this energy issue is terrible. I've worked with Jean-François Copé in his town hall, and it's like when Marie Antoinette had to go to the gardens, I know, but we don't live in rough areas. And I was struck by a man that came and that said, well, the doctors found that I had 3 cancers, one on my prostate and one on my lungs, and but that's okay, doesn't matter. The issue is one of my windows is cracked, and therefore we can feel the cold inside. When I go to the hospital, I'm being treated, but when I'm at home, I've got no treatment for my window. And here we can talk about this insecurity, this precariousness in terms of energy, and we can see also that there is there are a lot of losses to add to that, and it makes their lives miserable. So we have to focus on that first and foremost. As far as local authorities are concerned, what struck me over the last few years was, and you may correct me if I'm wrong, the fact that public buildings are not as well insulated as they used to be. When you enter a building, you can clearly see that when you go to, for instance, I don't know, a new home, it's okay. But when you go to a town hall or a school and you see that some windows are broken, are cracked, and the insulation is not enough, I think it's a scandal, and therefore it is a very good idea to start the renovation work.
Comment est-ce que vous voulez que la parole publique soit crédible si c'est les pouvoirs publics qui organisent un plan et s'il y a des carreaux cassés dans les écoles?
Mais Nicolas, vous êtes un libéral
qui adhérait à essential. As Luc Ferry said, you can be a liberal and also a smart person. You can be down to earth. Obviously, you do need regulations. Benoît Bazin, you also have an international vision of the plans that can be implemented in France, those that have been implemented abroad. You're one of the leaders of the construction sector at the global scale. So what do you think of that plan? Well, we put forward several recommendations. I do think that what is stipulated in that plan is very good. We have a 10-year experience, and I think that one of the major issues is the implementation capacity. There are very good ideas in this plan. Everything that's been said so far is very good, but I think that we do need to keep things simple. Government organizations have to be as condensed as possible to make sure that we know who to talk to, and we need some visibility. We need to be able to predict things. And I do think that the energy certificate is extremely important. The EPC is extremely important. It's become something common in the French society. So these are extremely important factors, and also training the workforce is essential. If you were to compare to other countries, we have to make sure that information are transparent when it comes to the quality of the housing, when it comes to the quality of the material. That's something prevalent in northern countries because of societal and also climatic, environmental reasons. And this is something that we are trying to implement now. Energy performance is part of the construction sector. So we have to make sure that this energy performance is also something that the private individual bears in mind through transparency of information, through renovation. And I'd like to go back to renovation because it is our main subject here. So the idea is to renovate the buildings for comfort. And so what you're saying here is that the owner or the tenant has to be involved in all this. They have to realize that it will benefit them. You are producing more and more low-carbon materials that will help improve this thermal comfort. Yes, indeed. Or we might talk about visual comfort, for instance, the quality of the light or air quality when you decrease the levels of carbon dioxide. then the brain will work better. So you have to bring together several aspects and involve the private individual, for instance, in schools, but also regarding topics like energy performance. I think that we have to make sure that this energy performance certificate has to be made compulsory if you want to rent your property, for instance, or sell your property. It is also something very interesting economically. There are areas in France with a 30% difference in terms of price because of the energy performance of the building. So the private individual will realize in the near future the importance of this energy performance certificate. Pascal, you said that customers should not be forgotten, and users are customers, so they have to be involved, and they're going to bear the brunt of all this if the carbon dioxide levels are too high, or if they're cold in their homes. So they have to be involved in the whole thing, right? To make sure that they support the plan. Yes, indeed. And I do think that starting with schools is a very good thing, because this is something that we something that we supported at Antec. The idea is that, well, obviously, I run a company, I'm in favor of business, but first and foremost, I'm a citizen. I'm also a father. I have a family, and like many of you at some point, I started asking myself some questions, human questions, and having a nice dwelling is as important as having access to health or food. It's a primary need, and it's a primary right. And the right of housing is essential, but it's also very complex. Energy renovation has to be supported, obviously, but you have to bear in mind that it is something changing. You can invest in housing to make it more efficient, but in 15 or 20 years, things will have evolved, and therefore, we might have, for instance, in 20 years' time, to use the AC much longer throughout the year than we do now. So nothing's set in stone. We are all growing older, that's a fact. That's something that is for sure. And this is something on which we exchanged with Philippe. At some point, we realized that many people start renovating their homes when they want to sell it. And if the building hasn't been renovated and it's in a pitiful state, then the sale should not be allowed. But when we are dealing with single-parent families, when there's an issue of heirloom, what should we do? I thought, I don't know, about a bank account that could be created and that could be used only for housing purposes. Something that could be open at birth, and I don't know. I thought that if we were to save 500 euros a year after 10 years, everybody would have saved 20 billion euros. But, well, it would be difficult to consider it as a sort of social security. Philippe Pelletier.
Dans les écoles, on a un ministre de l'Éducation nationale qui
The education minister is really, really good. Is all about sharing and is really working hard regarding that issue. Is he trying to raise awareness among students? Well, the answer is yes. He's working really hard on this. He made a few announcements about 3 weeks ago. And the idea is to raise awareness, to raise students' awareness. But we also have to fight one of France's bad habits, working in silos. So building walls between different positions. The idea is really to become more efficient. What is essential, and that can be found in everything that we've said so far, is that renovation, the energy renovation of buildings has to be part of the building's life. As Pascal was saying earlier, there are moments that will be better for renovation work. So we have to emphasize the importance of these moments. And there are levers that are not
l'économie d'énergie égale l'économie tout court pour le ménage concerné et pour la
as simple as we thought there were at the beginning of the Grenelle. For instance, energy savings means energy reductions means savings for the poorest families. That's not just it. Indeed, if you insulate a house better, it will cost less money to heat the dwelling. But there are other levers that could be considered, and that's something that we envisaged with Saint-Gobain. Not all the levers are the same for each and every one of us. For instance, some of us might be concerned by things having to do with sustainable development, the protection of the future generations, and so on, and others might be concerned by issues of comfort. Indeed, a renovated house with a very consistent, a very smooth heating everywhere around the house is much more comfortable than being cold near the windows and too hot at the center of the room. So there is something to be considered when it comes to the energy efficiency of the building and its market value. Even more so when you realize that many sales are carried out without taking this into account. Also, health is not something that is taken into account very much in the French approach, even though that is something that is widely considered in Britain, in England. They realized in England that the people that could not heat their homes showed certain pathologies that those with a good heating system didn't have. So those investing in the energy renovation of their homes made the country save 40 cents in terms of health insurance. So we also have to address the issue of the air quality inside our homes, because this is something that might become a major preoccupation, a major worry for tomorrow. Some pathology might appear, and I think that we have to envisage all the levers that will allow us to take action and to move forward, even more so when you realize that in the years to come we'll live longer. Nicolas, a word on health? Well, studies were made about what people react to as far as sustainable development is concerned. And we realized that people reacted more to positive messages than to negative messages. You might show people the consequences of a 4-degree temperature increase, the fact that the waters might be rising, and so on, without having them modify their behaviors. They will find it awful, but that's it. However, if you are to show them pictures of people riding bicycles, children playing in parks, people that are really happy, people will change. It's just like education with children. Yes, indeed. And therefore, we have to show people what this sort of change might bring them. It's not all about money, even though the financial issue obviously is extremely important, but that's not enough. And that brings me to my second point. You talked about this key issue. You talked about this comfort inside your home. What changed since May 68, which was an important event in France, but which is also an international event? Well, it was the moment when the Anglo-Saxon utilitarianism was brought to front. That means that the moment when comfort became more and more important in people's minds. And this is something that is prevalent in today's society. We think a lot about our comfort, that of our children, and so on. And that's what I'm reacting today. Even though I do not think that comfort is everything in life, but still, I do think that regarding what we're talking about, this notion of comfort will help people getting more involved in this energy renovation journey, and I do think that it will bear fruit. So the common point to explain all this and to federate people would be the notion of comfort, right? Yes, indeed. This plan has an indirect goal, that, well, namely, the creation of jobs. You all generate jobs, new jobs. No. 170,000 people were not hired by ACRS? Yes, but there were more jobs created at Saint-Gobain. Yes, indeed, but still, you're going to create job employment. However, there are dark areas. There weren't any figures given regarding the creation of employment. But since we have a specialist of construction who likes figures, could you give us a few figures in terms of employment, job creation? And I learned from school that when the job market's all right, everything's all right. So, could you please all answer? Very concretely, just to tell you all about what we're experiencing at Saint-Gobain, well, I would like to say a few things first. I am surprised. I was at Saint-Gobain during the financial crisis, and I thought that bankers had been very creative, and they still haven't been when it comes to energy renovation. And when I mentioned the gaps between an energy-efficient building and a non-efficient building, I think that obviously, I think that the finance sector could be a bit more creative when it comes to the funding of these plans, because it's an investment. There is an investment in our production factory, our manufacturing factory. We are injecting tens of million euros for insulation materials, because these products do not travel far. They travel about 300 to 500 kilometers around the factory. Also, create jobs. We are talking here about qualified jobs with an added value. Industrialists usually wait for the regulations in order to make changes. Also, we're talking about qualified jobs here for all these artisans. We are talking about noble jobs with a certain know-how. The RGE that was introduced a few years back was a good example of that. We trained actually 20,000 employees ourselves in the distribution centers, which was quite a prowess in itself because 70,000 in all were trained, and we're talking here about qualified jobs. Also, the digital field can help us train and emphasize the value of all these sectors. Here we're talking only about Saint-Gobain, but the construction sector is creating jobs at the moment. We're creating production jobs, services, and so on. And the idea here is that we are creating jobs with an added value, more qualified jobs. So it's a 5-year plan, and we realize that 1.5 million housings will have to be renovated because they are not energy efficient. Can these figures allow you to forecast evolutions? And I'm not asking you a trick question here. It's a real question. For those of you who like figures, I think it's really important to have an idea of what will happen in the future. Well, we have a 5-year vision forecast for the French market. I'd like to take another example. Until recently, the windows were part of the CITE, and I think it's odd to take it away from the CITE. Let's make things simple and allow people to predict things easily. So the idea is to make forecasts for 5, 10, 20 years, and we have so many buildings to renovate, individual private buildings or public buildings. Also, the demand will continue increasing, and therefore the need to invest and produce added value in the construction sector will continue to increase. And in a few years, we'll think that there will be solutions. So like you said, it's the right path, but so far, the results of the energy transition plan haven't been reached. So for the industry, it's not easy to continue with this policy, even though the government has changed. Yes, but we had different governments, and they all maintained the same bearing. So that was quite a good thing. And we shouldn't change all the parameters, all the settings every time. We have to keep up. We have to maintain the right direction, and I think that it's a long-term vision, and it's a win-win in the end. Pascal, can you feel in your company or at Intec that these figures could have a positive effect on growth and employment? Obviously. And I'm not going to say otherwise. Changing the rules is very complex. As far as the measures that have already been implemented are concerned, I would say that the RGE didn't work. We trained ourselves. Quite a few companies were trained at Intec, but we didn't receive any call. And in terms of employment, it's something huge, really. And like Mr. Bazin was saying, and that's what I was saying at first too, it is something that is going to evolve. It is something that will continue evolving, and it's very interesting for the entire sector, for the industry, for engineers. It is actually very exciting. It's a job with an added value, really. Nicolas, we're talking about renovation, we're talking about construction, getting rid of the 1.5 million of substandard housing, but at some point it will create employment, right? So the two are linked. Three things. The government didn't set any target in terms of job creation, and I think it was right to do so for a very simple reason. The goal of an energy renovation plan is not to create jobs, it's to renovate buildings. This is an indirect cause. Here, I would say that creating jobs is an entirely different thing. Obviously, it's very good to do so, but I thought that it was actually very wise not to try and quantify this. More than one government had to bear the brunt of making such forecasts. Yes. Secondly, today, half of the companies tell the INSEE that their problems in terms of economic development is that they have difficulties recruiting employees. And here, the issue isn't, are we going to generate enough jobs? The issue is, are we going to be able to employ enough people? So there is a macroeconomic aspect that has to be addressed. In terms of vocational training and unemployment benefits. And I think that we have to bring together the offer and the demand when it comes to employment. But this is an issue that we'll have to address for several years, and at some point we'll have to address the issue also of vocational training. And I think it is a shame that this plan should be hindered because we don't have enough people to work on renovation projects.
On top of that, we need to put an end to the silo culture in France. And training really, however, must really be targeting some of the trades, building trades. And I think, indeed, we in the industry, in the building industry, need to take advantage of that to develop a more prospective approach. Now, in terms of the visions, now come back to the link between employment and our industry. The fundamental issue between employment and building is that there are buildings that really have to, be taken into account. We have significant needs in France. We're talking about over 1 million housing units. The problem is not the overall housing stock. It is an issue that relates to the location where these housing stock is located. So we don't need to build more new housing units, but where we need it. So, just to simplify in practice, in metropolitan regions, where jobs can be found, where jobs are located. So, it's about spatial planning development policy, but we need to prioritize our problems. We need to, whether that is in Toulouse, Bordeaux, in the inner ring of Paris, And this is where we need to set our priorities when it comes to locating housing. Plus, we have to renovate existing housing. And of course, it means about enlarging existing housing units, and so to provide more sizable housing units. And the Sarkozy government targeted not about constructing new housing units, but enlarging existing housing units. And I think all of these really is important. We need to be very pragmatic about things. We need to build housing where we need them. And contemporary modern capitalism is what it is. It is about the concentration of wealth. This is a metropolitan related phenomenon where wealth is concentrated. In Châlons-en-Champagne, for instance, if there's no job in the suburbs of Châlons-en-Champagne, well, the real estate will be depreciated, will be, because there will be no jobs in there. So we need to be very pragmatic in our approach when it comes to the optimizing of housing units. And there might actually be jobs that might not be filled in, and that's it. It's not about there could be. It's just incredible. That's the case. We have 8% unemployment rate, and we are looking for people in the building industry, and that's really important. That's something that we need to address. So we need to really think things through when it comes to this issue, because the government can do that. But when it comes to sectors, businesses, we need to be a driving force to put forward proposals to the government. It's just stupid from a macroeconomic standpoint. It's a kind of situation we live in. Although there's still an unemployment rate of 8%, growth and job creations might be hampered between this mismatch between the supply and demand. And so you need to get it right, on the present and to analysis of the future, because we must not result in the fact that there are new jobs where there hasn't been any new talents, where young generation has not been trained and has not received appropriate training. So we might end up with a shortage in training of young people. So there's a mismatch between the current situation and structural. So short-term needs are not necessarily the needs in a medium term. So, and just to, I was a few days ago meeting with a few players in the transport. We need drivers, and really need to address these, because we need to address this. We need to train. We need to hire drivers. We need to have in mind the fact that we are in sectors where technology requires scalable skills, so subject to evolution. So the needs, as employers, we need to be developing a training logic, a training approach, making sure that within the next 5-10 years, these people might not work in the same sectors, industries, or businesses, for that matter. So when it comes to from heat comfort to digital know-how on heat control and digital knowledge, we're talking about transition, environmental and transition. We have to we're facing these two revolutions. Now, mutations are often mutations of technological conversions. Today, it's not only digital, but it's also artificial intelligence and the environmental transition as well, as we've experienced in some ways, and energy transition. So there's always a gap. So how do we finance this plan? Talked about energy transition. We have significant depth here. There are a few shadowy, just unclear areas when it comes to, social support, taxes. So, do owners want to pay? Will these be catered for, taken care of by tenants to a certain degree? Although, as we said, Mr. Bazin, there are innovations when it comes to financing. And there are, evolutions. There's evolutions in financing mode. You've actively participated to this thinking process. Dear panelists, how, what's up now? Now, you are, it is not, you're absolutely spot on. All the arrangements pertaining to the rollout of the new plan have not yet been arbitrated, but this should be the case between now and the summertime. So we are on the right track. And to do so. So the reality is that we're not starting from scratch. We are attaining a 400,000 housing units as renovation. So 200,000 in the private sector, and 200,000 in the social. For social housing. So we know that the 500,000 housing units will not be sufficient between now and 2050. And from 2020, 2022, we'll need to shift to 700,000 housing units being renovated. So there has to be the creation of a renovation market, and all will not be taken care of by the state, financing-wise. So we need to step out of this addiction to the state. So there's one area where the state efforts must be maintained very firmly indeed, that of finding energy underprivileged and so precariousness. And this is part of the state effort that need to be protected that way. Are you talking about the 1.5 million of thermal passport, or the 400,000 or 500,000? Well, this is the 150,000 within the 500,000. So we need to redistribute, indeed, and if there are no massive subsidies, there will not be anyone, there will not be the energy, the people getting out of, moving away from energy precariousness. So if we talk about those, funding, allowing, those banks or banking establishments providing zero-rate credit or loans for the purpose of the households. When it comes to collective housing units, probably for energy renovation, for we need to smoothen the expense, what needs to be spent over time, so that to get a financing line for those in joint ownership, and so we can maintain this tool that is not very costly, the zero-rate loan. Then we have tax credits. It's a bit more costly. It cost 1.5, 1.7, 1.8 billion last year, and so plus, some of the lines there amounted to 800 million. So I think this budget will maybe shrinking. So and the attempt here is going to be about making it more efficient. So I know what you mean in terms of the playing on the rates and benefits, in terms of the types of equipment that can be subsidized or supported. that can be a further way forward. And there's another type of, another aspect that is growing is what we call the certificate of energy savings. So energy saving certificate accounting for about half of the financing budget. That was not the case 10 years ago. That's now the case. It is a smart system that was invented, as you know, and the energy operators are now requested to commit to support energy savings and energy consumption reduction in return for energy saving certificate in reflecting more virtuous energy systems. And us as we pay for these in our energy bills, and that's painless for us. And this will develop because the obligations imposed to energy operators have you know, increased. So and and I think this is not enough. And the real solution is consisting in inventing new solutions of private financing to support these initiatives. So we find it difficult to raise interest amongst banks because they have now got into an industrialization process of their loans, and they are now being asked to provide more tailor-made solutions, and their logic is that of volume. And so we will need to engage them. I'm a strong believer in some of the solutions. Some have already managed to close agreements, as in the case of Marca in Brittany, with a commitment to energy renovations. And that is the case in the northern part of France. And so with the KfW in Germany, which is now going to finance regional initiatives, but the private funding will need to play a role. And beyond that, and can we not this might be, you know, how about valuing the value of the real estate? So when it comes to successions, so that there's value when it comes to, some might not like that, but the succession rights, so heritage, inheritance tax will help in financing such spending. So as the inheritance is very, very much there in our mindsets, in our culture, but this could contribute to a raw economic role that was maybe kind of local, then local authorities scaled sort of local initiatives, so breaking silos. So what about the reduction in subsidies for local authorities, for public buildings, school buildings, renovations, schools depending on the municipalities, high schools will depend on the department, and universities depends on the region. So how do we renovate public buildings within that multi-layered system? What about the heat comfort, non-heat comfort? When there might be a difference depending on where you are in a private or public building. How do local authorities, how can they finance their subsidies, their renovation works? That's the crux of the matter. Now, the state wanted to be to set an example, and has wanted to set an example. Let's not criticize the state too much, because there's been tremendous steps forward about drastically banning, limiting the floor surface area occupied by the civil servants, and by cutting down the surface areas used, the state has done a pretty good job when it comes to energy savings. There hasn't been much by way of innovation or renovations of its housing stock, but it was a first effect produced here. So how do we go about local authorities now? Maybe that will come as a surprise to you if I tell you that within a work group that we facilitated with many local authorities, the Caisse des Dépôts, and the financing was not a primary consideration of local elected politicians. They have considerable considerations as to the methods, the choice of the buildings to be renovated, the level we want to attain in terms of the performance. As for households that we try to support, so how do I get started? How do I go about it? These are the same questions that the elected politicians ponder about. So then the point here, there are several ideas there. First of all, we have the funding provided by the Caisse des Dépôts, which there are existing lines there. I'm in favor of a further idea. We could finance these renovation works in over an extended period of time by requesting the banking industry to provide loans which amount and duration is based on energy savings that we can expect. So the municipalities would pay monthly installments based on energy savings performance, and then we need to sell these debts in the form of assets in the insurance market. So with an extended lifespan, as long as there's total security in terms of the debt that is then turned into a title or an asset. So it's a case of securitize. So we need to securitize these to provide long-term lending opportunities. So when it comes to the contract of energy savings, the landlords might request for us to renovate their buildings by guaranteeing a result. Performance and works is only one way of meeting the performance, the results, and then there's the guarantee. And because if we work out the financing, if the financing is not there, the business will pay for the gap, the delta. So it is a model that might provide a trust, safety or security when it comes to putting in place those financing schemes. But it is complex, but I do think that in some of the areas we will achieve good results. And there are regions that have embarked on massive renovation projects of their housing stocks. The city of Paris has now launched its third wave of renovations for schools, and so 300 schools. So we're making progress there. Pascal Asselin. So you're increasingly involved in life cycle analysis when it comes to construction projects. So you've been experimenting more and more. And the Au plus c'est moins is the label you've been promoting. And as part of the 2020 plan, this is not short-term, this is kind of medium-term plan. This will allow you to get a better estimate of the cost, and everything is correlated here in this conference, but cost might not be less, but it will generate energy savings. That's the name it again. That's the purpose. Yeah. So all of these is really at the service of the owners, but it's an asset. We're talking about the liabilities, but it is definitely an asset. I don't know what this will be like 10 years down the line. But to pick up on what has just been stated, energy performance, has gone quite a long way. When you view a property, you want to rent it, you want to buy it, from a psychological standpoint, there is an impact when it comes to the energy certificate, energy performance of the building. Now, it's something that people look at now. Now, we've been experimenting, and I think this is the right method. And I claim that we have the right to make mistakes. We have to redirect our choices depending on the technological evolutions and solutions. So, obviously, you're welcome. So, there might be pluses and minuses. We will be learning. And so producing housing is not more and more expensive. So that's a false truth, which we need to assert here. With the French Federation of Buildings, we took 150 projects from start to finish from 2005 to 2006. And now looking into the same period 10 years later. So the cost of building housing has not gone up. People say it costs more and more, but it's not the case. So there's a learning curve that it was like this at the start, and then the market kind of became so flat, and the price just slowed down. So we're talking about 200,000 workers in the building industries. People say it costs more to produce housing, but the learning curve is continuous. So what values can you compare? Because we haven't got the same number of workers in the building industries between 2005 and 2015. So the good news for us, Nicolas, is that there's digital data that changes every minutes, every hours, and this is cost. So you can digitize your objects using 3Ds. You got so much technology going on, developing now, and these impact the cost. So building economists focused on that, but it's really important to take this into the analysis of building. So it is really when it comes to if you take these analysis into account, then that's it. It's exactly that. So it is a kind of product analysis, and indeed it changes. It is impacted by new processes. So without talking about lean method and related efficiencies, what from an economic standpoint, not from an energy standpoint, what can be the result of these? The digital tools can allow us to compute more data and more quickly. So necessarily there will be significant productivity gains, and as a result of the information put at the disposal of everyone. When it comes to automatically generating quotations from the energy performance, and the tradesman just can output those quotes very quickly. the digital passports we're contemplating for buildings with a digital car. And it's also a way forward. What's really important for people in industry is that the whole chain starts very upstream. And in an industry where we like call for tenders and counting everything from, and at times things have to be done overnight. So the more we can design and phase buildings, the finer the tools they'll be used more and more. So the finer the estimate. Yes, logistics subject to urban constraints because we build more and more in urban environments. There are huge logistic gains and construction times. So in terms, and when it comes to prefabricating modules, and as opposed to laying blocks of bricks. And so these methods will impact the building industries, the construction industries. Now you share your data to nurture the BIM processes, digital models for energy transitions and efficiency, leveraging collaborative efficiency. So most of our product families around the world, well, we have at times negative outlook on recycling, but those in building industries, well, have been recycling plasters, and for 20 years we have a dedicated site. We're one of the first ones to launch a insulation recycling industry, and we were one of the first ones to do that. So when many countries have embarked on recycling products, or distributors, traders, and retailers, so that there has to be a requirement for recycling of buildings. So it is a factor of progress, performance of materials and buildings, because all of these leads us to make progress as we go along. So as part of the Elan law submitted to the Parliament is the vital card for housing. What is your view on the matter? Because we can say that this is the service of health of buildings and occupants of buildings. So there will be the whole data from digital standpoint that we can acquire and share and input in this vital and this sort of social security card of buildings. It's, if I may say, it's almost no longer relevant. And it's what we did in the field of health. And we put this in place, this social security card, some 20 years ago, so it's almost anachronistic. But Google will put this in similar systems in place very, very quickly. So that refers to what I wanted to say right before. I think the cost of construction of buildings will drop because we are completely underestimating the productivity gain linked to the technology and convergence, which I was referring to. Maybe the 3D printer going forward. So that's a field that might, these efficiency gains will, be tremendous with the introduction of new technologies now, and the value chains will evolve. What is the real obstacle and challenge to using the BIM? Well, it's the fact that this innovation is so disruptive that to use it well, we need to reorganize the whole value chain. That's something that takes time. These are silos, we all agree. Let's imagine that once you get your technological productivity or efficiency gains, once the industry gets, puts his act together, then we'll have to, face the issues we'll have, and we'll move forward. We'll make progress. Beyond that, we need to address the new EU regulations, which are at times obstacles. So we need to be very wary. That's the obstacle. The obstacles relate to the constraints that we ourselves put in our own ways. And beyond the GAFAs, do you think that the US and the Chinese create startups and pure players, whilst Europe creates red tape? Europe creates constraints on a flow that isn't there, that does not exist, and it hits us. And I met the Chinese government, and I was in China, not at the Congress of the Communist Party. Was it a training, says the facilitator? And, well, they told me, well, the whole issue of data privacy, protection of private data, use of privacy, we fully understand that. We are asking ourselves the same questions. However, we're going to be becoming the leaders first. And then secondly, we'll put in place regulations. So we need to learn to think that way and to approach problems that way. On the digital card of housing, Benoît Bazin, you are, when it comes to all the materials you make and distribute, well, what's happening there? 50 attributes on a project. So the whole set of information is getting richer and richer as to the faculty of developing projects on assembling systems. And so we have a production of systems more than the products taken in isolation. So it's beyond isolation of buildings. And the maintenance side of things and life of buildings. So that's something. And would you have great interactions to create with your users, communities in any specific fields? And so that you were launching a platforms as a innovation to that end. Indeed, which is me to the next point. The group has launched the Saint-Gobain community group, so for private users sharing information, as individual users are more and more prescribing, as with the 10-year warranty for the artisans. So the individuals will be the driving force of emissions of volatile composites in our environment, in regulations. So we need to favorably impact the industry. So the individuals. So we talk about universe inspirations, and then we qualify, we certify artisans, trades. Operators in the building industries. So the inspiration is about driving to innovative solutions and upgrading, and industrial and distributors. So we're fortunate, sustains this, supports this, because we have people who have a very good knowledge of the market, and that's also the target is also about capturing data. Indeed. Pascal, if you want to bring this great discussions to close, we have technical constraints for everyone. We have buses waiting everyone.
C'est des bus, je ne sais pas ici, ils sont électriques, je ne sais pas. Mais ce sont des bus. Comment dire? En tout cas, merci d'être venu.
So, thank you very much for these was most exhaustive discussions. I was not too much and in something when it comes to the energy transitions, renovations of the housing, construction industries. This is a soft, very soft materials, very noble as well, that changes all the time. So these are jobs, professions that will develop, and these are for humans, really. And a convergence of jobs is a real topic.
La question nous qu'on se pose aujourd'hui, d'ailleurs,
and really the point here, which is really, we will meet you on the 20th and 21st of June in Avignon. So the topic next year, the seminar next year to which you're invited, will focus on the big data, artificial intelligence, and things can move way faster than we think. So the initial training is absolutely essential, and continuous training is absolutely essential as well. And that's not once every 3 years, but you've been very active there. To conclude on that,
on avait lancé le premier MOOC prescrire et estimer à l'heure du BIM.
And we launched a free MOOC for everyone. We said, well, we're going to do that editorial line, and we're going to be on the platform. We'll have comedians talking, and thought, well, if we get 1,500, 2,000 people, it's going to be great. We ended up with involving 7,000 users. So people are starting to take ownership of these, and we've got another 5 MOOCs today. So hence sharing is key. We need knowledge, we need to share, and that's exactly that. So working in silos really is not the way forward. Thank you very much indeed.